Okay, we're being recorded now. Okay, so first time in class, and it's nice because today is a lab day, and lab day is essentially a day where we really get started with R. So this is, I have specifically designed this to be early in the game. So now we have had the first two sessions. Now this session, I really want to focus on actually make sure that you're comfortable with R. Does anybody have the feeling that they have particularly strong problems with R? Or is, yeah, okay. So everybody has an installation though, right? So the installation is not the problem. R is installed, R Studio is installed, and you were also able to run the practice lab. That was not a problem. Good. Okay, so that's good. At home, please raise your hands as well if you have anything to add to the problem. If there were any problems at home, please also let me know. It's interactive on all ends. So the idea today is essentially that we will only work in R. Try to do practice lab 3 that you can download from Canvas. So you basically, so the way the modules are structured, and I have alluded to this in the first class. So there's always a checklist and learning objectives. You find the lecture link, the Zoom link here. You find the respective discussion topic of the week that's currently active here. And you find the action practice labs here. And the practice lab for this week is data from the BRFSS study. This is the Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System study. That's a CDC-funded study that essentially has surveyed a large number of US citizens, and by that basically gave insights into health dynamics and behavioral risk dynamics in US citizens. This being said, so we are now looking at actual data. So Professor Kahn has looked back to me that you would like to see more health data. So there was some conversation along these lines. Is there? I'm just wondering what specifically was the context of this conversation when you. I don't know who was at that meeting. So there was some interest in health data communicated to Professor Kahn, and I was wondering to what extent you think. There are specific data that would be needed in this regard. So,
like how biostats acts in biotechnology or the industry, and how what kind of health data is actually worked with this. So that's more like what I prefer. Like we have examples, we get the basics clear.
yeah.
What kind of a health this is? If we are speaking from like an industrial point of view, how biostatisticians see which kind of data and utilize it for which work.
Yes, so the idea is essentially the data that we will be working with is essentially data that statisticians will be working with. So all the data that we have, we're only working with cross-sectional. So we're not doing longitudinal data analysis, which is beyond the scope of this class. We will be only focusing on cross-sectional data, and this will keep you busy enough, trust me that. But essentially, the format of data is structured. This will literally be how data sets will look like and how you would approach them out in the world. So this is essentially, if this was the question, that's essentially answered that way. So you will get data and you will be asked to do analysis on this data exactly in the way how you would do it if you work at a research institute or you work for a hospital. And you are conducting analysis in the setting or in the capacity of an analyst. So this is definitely what you will be exposed to in this class. So at this point in time, we will be working with publicly available data sets, just like the BRFSS and the NHANES. For the reason for this, we don't need IRB approval, and this is not actually research data. So that's why I chose to use this data. The data structure of these data sets are consistent essentially with what you will be using for analysis on this data. So I have reviewed paper that have used the same data sets that we will be working with. So this is real life data. So this is definitely this is data from real respondents. This is real health data. This is real health assessments. If you go on into the package that I have uploaded, you will be able to download the actual enhanced data. If you, in addition to that, you go on the CDC website, you get a plethora more variables than those packed into the package. You are able to get very fancy additional parameters. You get medication data, you get data, and this is particularly interesting for those that are more technologically inclined of you. So since this is a biotechnology management course, right? You may be interested to also look into more biotechnologically inclined parameters. Like for example, there's data from DEXA, which is a whole body dual X-ray absorptiometry, which essentially allows you to get bone density, allows you to get muscle mass. Then you have bioimpedance data on there. Bioimpedance is essentially, I don't know how much you're comfortable with, you're nodding your head, which so commonly everybody knows from gyms, for example, when you go in and you start working out in the gym, they do a first assessment with you and they measure your muscle mass, or your fat mass or whatsoever, with bioimpedance methods. A lot of my research actually has focused on bioimpedance assessments in chronic kidney disease. So I've done quite a decent amount of work on the topic. So bioimpedance, if you're interested in bioimpedance, please by all means, like let's explore the enhance and let's get some of the data out there. I'm quite comfortable with the technology per se, also with the methods and the models behind it. So the models that were used, to the best of my knowledge, are single frequency methods of bioimpedance. And these are essentially inferior to multi-frequency methods, but that was what the CDC chose to use. But it's interesting to essentially look at various different parameters in that regard. So my research has, for example, focused on fluid volume overload and bioimpedance assessments in chronic kidney disease. So I know from the enhance that this was part of my master as a clinic. I know that there are in the enhance a decent amount of subjects, participants in there at different levels of chronic kidney disease. So if somebody's interested in chronic kidney disease, please by all means, let's explore the enhance. So there's a lot of data that you will be able to evaluate in the course of this class. The examples during the practice labs are somewhat simpler. They're not very much in depth, but I very much encourage you to look at it in more detail for the final project. And whoever wants to do something with chronic kidney disease, please by all means, I'm game. Let's do it. Yeah. Okay, just wanted to make a note on that. Okay, practice lab module 3. So I think let's get started. Any questions from somebody who joined remote? Aria itself? No? Good. Then I would say we get started. Okay, so we have here the BRFSS data. So we copy this whole story over, so open our minimize this now. Open a new script. So I hope all of you have this folder. This is quite simple. So please create a folder as we did in last class. So we're creating a folder on the desktop in class BTM6000. We're creating module 3. We have here practice lab 2, which is essentially so let's get started. What are we meant to do? So do you actually have access to the Word file? Okay. Okay, practice lab 2. So the BRFSS. So the first item to do whenever I start a code. Okay, again, so just as a quick recap, you have in front of you, you have RStudio. RStudio splits in 4 quadrants. Quadrant number 1, left top, the script. This is essentially what you will be saving. You started this. I always start with here the environment. This is what you want to do first, and then just save it. Save it right from the start. Make sure you always auto save it. Nothing is worse than when something gets lost. You run a code, this takes an hour. R decides to not do the whole thing, dies, and your code may go. It's usually not the case. R is pretty good at preserving these codes. Even if the whole system fails, usually the code survives. So if you do, now let's label this. So because of submission, I would please ask you to label it the following. Label it lab class 3, then your name, then a table. So the reason why the name is important, because when I download it, it's just easier for me if I have your name in the file name. Otherwise, it's getting a little bit. So I would appreciate it. Okay, you clear the environment. First thing you clear the environment, you do the rn function. Rn list equals ls will clear the entire environment for you. That's always a good start. That is always a good start to do because it will.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm trying to save it into the file into the folder we just created, and my computer's telling me that it's going to change it into a form that's not our script. So is there like an extension I have to add when I'm saving it?
Yes, it's usually .r.
Okay.
So if you are you on a Windows computer?
Sorry? Yeah, Windows.
Windows or Windows? Yeah, so call it was the extension .r. Looks exactly like this. Dot capital R. Yeah? This was it. Yes. Good. So this you're basically doing every time before you start an analysis, you clear your environment with the idea that your environment is absolutely blank, and you can start from scratch to essentially populate your environment with the objects that you will be needing. And this just makes life much, much easier because it will essentially allow you to have order in your system and have order in your structure and your environment. So, all right. So this is the first thing we want to do. The second thing is then really to click into back into the practice lab. And here is the code source HTTP. So gives you the web link cdc.r. If you run this code, it will control enter, runs this code, and this will automatically download the file for you from the CDC website. So those of you who have gone on the open intro, so this is one of the publicly accessible source codes from R. Open intro provides and allows you to pull this data from the CDC website. Good. So now we have a file labeled, an object labeled CDC in the environment. Do you see all the stuff? Yeah. Good. All right. So now, now we go back to what we did in the past with with these files. So we structure, we comment. We have here environment is RM, and now we have loads the data. Then we have load packages. That's also important. Never forget that all the packages that you will be needing, and I highly recommend that always put them at the beginning of the script. Always put them on top. So very good. So we will be using for this class, we will be using the Blotrix package. So if you go on package, you likely will need to install it. You go on package. So again, you have left top, this is your script. Left bottom, this is your console. That's your actual R. Right top, this is your environment. Right bottom, these are the packages, the blobs, and the help. So if you want to install a package, you basically go on packages, and you go on packages install, and you do Blotrix. Once you install it, it will ask you whether you're okay with restarting R. You just say yes. It does everything for you in the background. So basically it stops R, it restarts R, and it runs the whole thing, and then it installs the Blotrix package. Any problems with that?
Yeah, it's telling me that Plotrix isn't a package that exists, and I don't have a tab in my environment that says packages.
If you go, okay, so you have right bottom, you have your packages.
No, what I see is just like I don't see the bottom right quadrant.
See something like this?
Yeah.
Can you pull it up? Found it? Okay. Let me know if it works. Okay, so this is the Blotrix package. Now, as per the layout of the practice lab, we are now asked to investigate the file. So always the first thing you do when you get a data set, and this goes hand in hand with the question, like how does data look like? When you're really an analyst and you're asked to look at this data, what's the first thing you do? Exactly, you look at it, but you don't look at it, well, you can look at it, but just viewing it. But you can also look at it by basically just looking at what are the parameters. So you basically go ls cdc. And ls will give you a list of sub-objects in there. These sub-objects essentially you can address, and we have done that, right? So we have addressed the sub object by basically CDC $ general health, for example, gives you an overview of general health. What is that? What else gives you an overview? Summary. Summary CDC general health. Okay. So by that you basically get overviews over what are these respective entries in your general health object. And you can also do summary CDC that will essentially also give you an overview over all the parameters. So this is one way how you can inspect the data. So what do we see here? We see general health, which ranges from excellent to poor. We have any exercise. We have health plan or health insurance plan. We have smoker. We have height. We have weight. We have desired weight. We have age, and we have gender. All quite intuitive parameters. What's interesting here is this is where I'm going a little bit to the subtlety of my job. So I'm not. So So I do a lot of things. One of my tasks, also at the institute I'm working at, is I'm the data protection officer. So I'm all about data regulations and data privacy rights. And one of the things that catches my attention here, and I'm just bringing this subtlety to your attention. So this is CDC data. Patients have signed informed consent, so this is all fine, right? So this is not really. But one thing I want to flag to you is there's a difference between what is called in the United States of America, and there are regional differences between the countries, what is considered constitutes a de-identified data set versus a limited data set versus an identifiable data set. And this is important. And you can look up the definitions, and I'm happy to drop it in the chat. Basically, John Hopkins has a really nice overview of what the de-identified data set is. And what caught my attention here is the maximal age. And this is important because a de-identified data set, as per the definition in the United States of America, is not, as per HIPAA, is not allowed to contain ages, individual ages exceeding 89 years of age. And why? Anybody an idea why that could be the case? Why does a de-identified data set have only ages stated? So if you have, for example, if you have an individual in your data set that is 93, you can still include this individual, but this age needs to be capped at 90. It's not allowed to exceed and show the real age. And when
Consistency. It might affect the inconsistency.
No, no, not the consistency. It's the identification shall make a data set non-identifiable. So if you are having a small subtraction of the population in your data set, you very much shrink the pool. So somebody who's 93 is from a very small pool of people in the United States.
It's like
What-
an outbreak. Outbreak.
Absolutely.
No, it's like it's not a common data. Some
Exactly.
Outbreak.
Exactly, it's not very common. So by that, essentially, you create a higher risk of re-identification. And now this brings me to the second level. So we have a de-identified data set, and then we have a limited data set. And the limited data set, you can essentially allow for more information, more possibly identifiable information to be included. One of them is age greater than 90 or zip codes, by essentially running a probabilistic statistical model that allows you to calculate the risk of re-identification for one individual in your data set. And if that risk is less than 6%, is one of the thresholds used in the US, you can actually use that approach. You can use this data set. So this is basically how you have to think about data privacy rights. So I'm just giving this as an example, because this is why it's important that you always do descriptive statistics for your data set. You always need to run this summary, because you need to understand not only what are the ages, what are the maximum, what is the minimum age, what is the maximum age. You also need to understand how many missing values, how many NAs would you have in your data. One thing. Then what outliers would you have? If you have a data set where you have somebody who is 154 years old, there's something wrong. Somebody didn't enter here, because yeah, wouldn't be possible. So these are the things you should always investigate, and you should not only investigate this using summary, but you should also investigate this using histogram function. So we have what data does it contain? So we just went through the data, right? So you just need to fill out now the Word document, and you send the Word document. So, okay, so what do we have now? So what data do we have? We have general health, we have smoking, with height, weight. So we have physical parameters, we have survey data, we have various parameters. So just explain them a little bit in the practice lab and set. Then what type of parameters do we have? And this is where we're coming to the so-called STR function. STR basically gives you a characterizations of all the parameters that are in there, all the variables that are in there. So if we're looking now at this, so it tells us there is a data frame that contains 20,000 observations in 9 variables. Out of these 9 variables, we have one that is a factor. A factor is essentially a factor variable. It's nothing else but a nominal variable that basically have been brought to the level of different factors within the variable that makes it easy for R to work with. So this is kind of a manual definition, and you need to explicitly define that for R. And then R will go ahead and treat this as a factor. And it will give you these different levels. And this is also where you get this really fancy output in the summary function, where it basically tells you, yeah, so we have with excellent with 4,657, with 6,000, blah, blah, blah. So it gives you this breakdown. It recognizes it. Otherwise, if you leave it only different as character, it would not do that for you. So you need to create these factors, and we will do that. So don't worry, we will do this manual manipulations. So, okay, what next? So what kind of variables are there? We have factors, we have numerical variables, which are ranging from, here we have height, weight. These are all numerically. Numerically meaning they are containing commas, or potentially could be containing commas. Bluntly spoken, they are no different here from the integers, which by definition don't contain commas. And then we have here 2 more factors, which is gender. Good. So these are the kind of variables. What type are the parameters contained? What type are the parameters contained? Yeah, so we have type of parameters, we have the kind of parameters, we know how they present. We can now describe the object, how many parameters we've just said that, how many cases is 20,000. How many males, females? We have done that.
Yes.
9,569 versus 10,431. Then we have showed the distribution of age as a histogram. So now it's getting interesting. Now we're going to do a histogram. We did not do a histogram. Okay, so let's get started with this. We remember from the descriptive statistic what a histogram is, right? So a histogram essentially is a bar plot over a continuous x-axis covering a certain range of numerical values and counting and displaying the counts of the cases within that respective range. This being said, if we use the so-called HISL here, we go up here and do the so-called hist function. The CDC, hist CDC $H will give you hist function. That's how easy it is. That's how easy you have made the first. Yeah. That's how easy you have made the first histogram. Now you can play even further around. Now you can say name equals quotation marks age of participants. With main, you can change the main type. You change the main type of your plot. If you write now xlab, you change the xlab. You change the x-axis.
Main adds the heading to it.
The
main
is the heading. Yes. Main is the heading. Xlab is the x-axis. So they run the x-axis. We can do the y-axis.
It's NAB is the short form for giving it a label, right?
Xlab is X label. Yes.
X label. Right?
Yes. Okay, so X lab and Y lab, we can just change this. Then we basically see these change on the histogram. The next on the histogram, we can also change. Breaks. Breaks equals 20. We'll change the number of breaks. And 40 will change them even further. So the more breaks you actually make, the more granularity you get in your data, and the more it will display the distribution, the frequency distribution of the data. Good. Then we have, so these are the histogram functions. So there are the various histogram functions. Please feel free to also kind of explore the histogram function with basically typing question mark hist. Will essentially allow you to review the histogram function. And there are various more additional things that you can do. You can do density plots, you can change frequencies. So there are a lot of things that you can do. So, okay. Good. So now we're getting a little deeper. Okay, how many cases? How many older than 25? How many older? Oh, actually, okay. How many are older than 25? And we remember. So how many older? Okay, so if we want to quantify the length of the entire data set, we get 20,000 lengths, right? That's the entire number of cases in your data set. If we want to subset this now, we're just going to look at a smaller subfraction of this. We do see. So with brackets, we can basically subset the variable lengths. So if we define CDC age smaller than 25, we essentially get the length. So we get only the number of entries of those younger than 25. So now this obviously makes a difference whether we do equal 25 or smaller 25 or smaller equal 25. So we have here, as we can see, we have here 365 individuals that are exactly 25 years old. So we have 23 and 2363 younger than 25, and we have 2728 young or equal 25. The difference is 365. So the same will now be true for 35. So we need to copy these two lines and we change to 25 plus 35. Ta-da. This is what this is. So now we have 6312 are younger than 35. 67484 are younger equal than 35. So this makes a difference of 472 individuals that are exactly 35 years old. So this is this. All right, summary statistics. That's simple, right? Anybody problem with this? It's straightforward. Right? It's just simple subsetting. We have all done this in data camp, so this is straightforward. Okay, so now next, now we're going to do some summary statistics. And we're not doing so obviously, if you do summary statistics, it's always easy. You can just like go and need a median, describe one continuous variable. let's pick, let's say, age again. Age with the summary. You can always do summary, but that's boring. You don't want to do summary. So we have here summary function. We can also do a mean function. That essentially gives us the mean that we also have here the summary. Then we can do median. Let's see. This is median. So everything we have found to be essentially included in the summary file is also going to be possible with the respective function to include. One thing I just want to outline here, and this is important, if you do median and mean, these functions will sometimes have NAs. If you have NAs which are missing, if you have missing data in your file, you need to add a little addition to this, which is the so-called na.rm equals true. na.rm equals true. So what does that mean? So the NA action. So whenever you have missing data, you will need to let R know what to do with this missing data. So R by default will get a hiccup. If you do mean and you have missing data included, you essentially it tries to add that up, it won't be able to do it, and basically it gives you a hiccup, and that's like can't do it. So na.rm equals true, and it gives it an na.action function and command of, okay, so you encounter NAs, you do that. And with rm, you basically remove them. You can also omit them.
So it removes the data from that particular.
It just removes that case, that row, that entire row. For different and more complex applications, it will remove the entire line as soon as it encounters a missing value in there. So that's where it makes a difference whether you do na.rm or na.omit or na.ignore. There are a couple of different ways how to deal with that. na.rm for now with the mean is perfectly fine. And you can do the same for the standard deviation. If you do standard deviation, you have SD, CDCH. You do a standard deviation, you basically also with na.rm equals true, you get the same thing.
Says two, right? It's two. 31.
Which one? This one?
30, yeah.
na.rm equals true. Yes, capital case true.
Exactly. Why do we use that?
Just equal to one missing.
That's the missing value story. So we're removing that case. If there's a missing value in there, and you would like to run the mean function, it would not run the mean function. It would not be possible to run the mean function.
So we are just blocking the whole command.
Hmm?
We're blocking the whole command. The mean command we're blocking.
No, we're blocking that case. So we're telling the function, as soon as you encounter a missing value, an NA, cut out the NA and just do it for those where you have no NA.
We're just adding the NA command, not available. The NA one.
NA is not available or missing, yes. So it's kind of an action command. It's you're telling R what to do when it encounters missing values. Yeah. Good. All right. Next. We have means, we have medians, we have modes. Yeah, the modes is a little tricky, and I actually put a peek there too. For some interesting reason, mode is really kind of hard. You remember what the mode is? Who remembers what the mode is?
What actually mode means?
Yeah. No, not the statistical mode. So when you look here at that, at this histogram, what would be the mode here?
Maybe like 39.
Yeah, yes, I tend to agree. It seems to be 39, yes. So the mode is always the most often occurring entry. In a histogram, it's a bin or a number. It is a number. So now this is a little tricky, and to some extent, this is now a little bit of a definition question. Right? So how do you define that? So there's a function that I dug out. How to do that actually, but I need to peek there, so forgive me for that. So this function, we're going to do the following. So it's a fun exercise because you also get to do a function. So this is our first function. So the question is now, what is a function, right? So we did not do any for loops yet. Let's start with a function. Mode function. Okay, so you are already using functions. Everything you're basically stating here, the mean, the standard deviation, the median, these are all already functions. So you're already working with functions, but you don't really know what you do. If you do, for example, if you do mean, this is your mean function. How do you get to the source code? There's some, yeah. Okay, sorry, I thought it's easier to the main function. Okay, but doesn't matter. So you're using already functions. These are already all functions. So now we're going to do a little function ourselves. We're going to call this function get mode. Get mode, we're going to tell it now this is a function. Function of v. The function of v essentially is unique v. Unique v. Which dot max tabulate match a little bit more complex one. Don't get intimidated. Now we have get. And so this is now our get mode function. Now get mode of CDC age gets us now 40. Close enough for 39. So what does this function actually mean? What does this function actually mean? So when we look here at, we are getting a unique entry of v. We are creating this function, which essentially then is used here by entering CDC age. CDCH is our variable and becomes here our B. So this basically means that we are creating a function that will require the input of a variable B. And this V is then defined within the bracket, within the parentheses following the function. So we basically have unique V, we have unique V, that's our function. We're getting a maximal entry, which max tabulate. So once we tabulate this whole thing, so we're basically, we're making a table with all unique entries. We're finding the maximal entry where we always have unique V's and from that list V. So this is what this means, and this function essentially gets us that one mode. That highest number of entries. It's playing around a bit. So it's not, you will very unlikely ever need to determine a mode, except for one of my exams. Don't worry about it. Okay, so what's next? Okay, so we have modes, then we have variance. Who remembers what the variance is?
Is it the square of standard deviation?
It's the sum of squared. It's the average squared sum. Yeah, getting close. It's the squared standard deviation. So essentially, you remember we're calculating a mean. So we both get starting grounds. Thank you. So you basically have a mean that you quantify, which is the sum of all entries divided by the number of entries. That's the mean. That's our center. The bell curve, this would be right in the middle. So now this mean, if you subtract from this mean individual entries, you get deviations. You get deviation values. If you square these deviations, you get squared deviations. If you sum them up, you get the so-called sum of squares. If you divide them by the number of entries, you get an average squared deviation, which equals variance. If you square root the variance, you get to the standard deviation. So that's the relationship. Those are the stepwise sequence to get from the deviation, mean individual entry, squaring it, square deviations, summing it up, sum of squares, dividing it by the number of entries, variance, square rooting it, gets you to the standard. Right? Good. Easily calculated variance. Var, VAR, CDC, H. That's the variance. Standard deviation, CDC, H. That's the standard deviation. SQRT of their CDC, H. That's the standard deviation, right? So it doesn't matter. So this is this. What else? Standard deviation, standard error. Well, that's a good trick. Who remembers what the standard error is? Did we actually talk about standard error already? I don't think we did, right? Yeah, because we're still on the first page. So the standard error in is as opposed to the standard deviation, which reflects the individual entry. The standard error is essentially the standard error of the mean. So this is if you draw an unlimited number of little samples from an overall population, you get sample means. You calculate the mean from each of these samples. So let's say you have a population, that's the population of New York City. You cannot calculate the standard deviation for the entire population because you can't measure every individual in the city. Right? So you take little samples. You take 100 samples there, 100 samples there, 100 samples there, 100 samples there. So you get like samples of like 10 people, and you get 100 of these 10 people samples. You calculate 100 means. And you're using this, you're using an estimation of your population mean by calculating 100 different means from your tiny little samples. And the mean of your means will be as close to your population mean as you can get. And the distribution, yeah, now that was a skeptical. You get one mean of your sample. If the sample is generalized to the population, you have exactly that mean. Unlikely this will be the case, right? So there will be a certain variation from the actual population mean in your sample, because it may be, I don't know, you may have drawn it from a particular area which is not representative for the overall population of New York City. So now you want more samples, and you get different means from different areas. And overall, these samples will represent the overall mean of the population of New York City. So you want 100 different samples of 10 individuals that you draw from the overall population of New York City. And these 100 samples of 10 will give you 100 different means, because each sample contributes one mean. And the distribution of these means, that's the standard error of the mean. And this standard error of the mean is an approximation of the population mean based on the size of the sample and the standard deviation of the sample. So this is what we're calculating, and the standard error of the mean is calculated as SEM equals ST divided by SQRT length CDC age. CDC. The SEM is 0.12. SEM, so let's call this SEM1, SEM2. SEM2 is now STD error of CDC age. Okay, make sure that you have run the library Blocktrix package. STD. CDC age. Okay, so it's std.error. So if you run those, you get two identical standard errors. So this is the calculation. One is the actual calculation, the other one is the standard error function. Did you install the package? Oh, you need to go on the right lower quadrant. Click on install package, install package, and install package Blocktrix. Yes. Blocktrix, PLOTRIX. Yeah. All right. Okay, so this was the standard error. So now we have the interquartile range, the IQR. Who remembers what the IQR is? Interquartile range is the difference between Q3 and Q1. So essentially, it's from that point below which we have 25% of our data. 25%. To that point where we have to that point below which we have 75% of all the data. So it's Q1 minus Q3 minus Q1. So if we want to do this and look at this, we can just do this, but just. So if we do summary CDCH, okay. Hold on a second. Okay. So if we have summary CDCH, we have here a minimum, the first quarter, median, mean, the third quarter, and the max. So the interquartile range, usually when you have, so you have two ways how to depict data. Continuous data commonly is depicted in two ways. You have, if you have continuous data that is normally distributed, you would show this as the mean plus minus a standard deviation. Right? If you would have data that is not normally distributed, which is skewed because of outliers, you would depict this as median, because median is more resistant against outliers, as we know, and 25th and 75th percentile. Another way to depict this is by depicting it as the so-called interquartile range. The interquartile range are the middle 50%. And this range essentially is quantified and defined as Q3 minus Q1. And this can be done, calculated by summary CDCH. And here you can get 1, 2. So you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So summary CDCH 5 is 57. This is how you address your third quarter. This is how you get to 57. If you want the first one now, you essentially do the same thing. Exactly. And how do you calculate the IQR now? Well, essentially, the IQR equals, you got it exactly. Number 5. Oops. 5. Minus 2. 26. If you want to present this only as the numeric value, so it kind of, as you can see here, it gives you the right value. It gives you 57 minus 31, that's 26, which is correct, but it still gives you the third quarter, this leftover character, which is annoying, and I'm not really sure why R does that. One way to do that is by basically just saying S dot numeric. You can even do this earlier. You say it up there in the formula. You say S dot numeric. You can kill it already up there. Now IQR is 26. So the beauty of this is, as soon as you have assigned this to this object becomes a numerical object. So whenever you need now IQR down the road, and you program another 5,000 lines of code, your IQR will always be 26. You can always ask for this number again when you need to do some calculations. Since you have it in the code, defined in the code, and you get a new data set, and your data set suddenly gets 10,000 more participants, the newly calculated IQR will also be then there for the next 5,000 lines. But this is the beauty of R, and this is the beauty of statistical programming. Whatever you're gonna do, whatever you're gonna change, you always have these determined objects and values that we essentially have carved in stone. All right, so this is this. So we show this data now as a box plot, a histogram. We've seen it as a histogram. Let's look at it as a box plot. Okay, let's do a so-called frequency table. Little table. So here we get individual entries for each value, right? So this is the beauty of having integer variables. You basically get a number for each entry. So if we are now showing this as a super bar plot table, CDC age, we're basically getting a bar plot that represents a histogram. Yeah. So now we can do all of this also in subsets. It's sometimes always good to consider gender as a potential mediator. You can always create subsets easily, but just creating subset subsets of population, and you do that just simply with CDC man, because now CDC was CDC man gender equals they are okay. Now we do the same for women. So what we're getting essentially is now yeah, so we're getting essentially, we get CDC man. We're assigning to this object here with the pipe. We're taking CDC. The CDC is an object, right? This is our 20,000 observation object. We're taking CDC gender. This is our subset, our sub-object gender, double equal sign, n for the characteristic. And comma after that means everything before the comma is defining the rows. Everything after the comma is defining the variables. So it's basically rows and columns, right? So here we're taking only the rows that contain m in gender, but we're taking all the columns. So this is the way of thinking. This is how you have to envision that. Okay, we have CDC is this entire data frame, 20,000 observations, right?
Sure.
No?
Got it.
Okay. CDC gender is the criterion for the row.
Yes.
We're only taking the rows that contains gender as a criterion, which is if we look at head CDC, here we have one, for example, right? So it only will take the first one. But since we have, after the comma, we have a blank, it will take all entries. It will take all variables. Everything before the comma defines the rows. Everything after the comma defines the variables. Rows and columns. Okay. So if we would, for example, if we would do here gender and we only do like 3 to 4, CDC name would only be 2 variables, 3 and 4. Does that make sense? So now I changed the strategy. Now I went and I changed this blank for 3 to 4. And now it only took like variable 3 and variable 4. So it only took those 2. So everything before the comma defines the variables. Everything defines the rows. Everything after the comma defines the variables. Okay? Make sense? And this is important down the road because this is data came towards criteria. So good. So this is this. So these are the subsets. So now we're working with calculating BMI. So BMI, and let's calculate the BMI maybe a little earlier. Who knows how to calculate BMI? So the BMI is calculated as the weight.
Weight over height.
Hmm?
Weight divided by height.
Height squared, yes, in meters. That's the practical. Okay, so we're doing BMI, CDC, BMI equals CDC weight divided by CDC height. I would say square, but first we need to understand what unit it is. So we do a summary, CDC height. We're having here, oh, this is inches, right? Terrible. This is inches. Right, so we need to convert this into meters. How are we going to do this? So we're multiplying, so 1 inch is 2.5 centimeters. So we're taking CDC height, multiplying it by 2.5 and dividing it by 100. That should get us to centimeters. Good enough. Okay, so we need to do this a little better. So where is that? Oh, the weight is in pounds too. Okay. So weight in pounds is CTC weight divided by 2.2. Yes, it's an American study. Okay, so now this looks well. Okay, two things we have to do. If we want to convert, we need to take into consideration the weight is in pounds. CDC weight divided by 2.2 will get us to kilos. CDC height multiplied by 2.5 gets us to inches, divided by, gets us from inches to centimeters, divided by 100 gets us to meters. Squaring this gets us to meters squared. And dividing now the weight in kilos by the height in meters squared gets us to kilograms per meters per square meter. Good. Good. So now we know how to calculate BMI. We have the BMI 9 there. We have the means. We can compare now. The comparison of the means are easily done, right? So you just need to means to see man. It's true. Essentially, you see now that women, that's actually somewhat surprising. They have a lower BMI as men in this sample. Usually this is the other way around. Or recognized physiologically and anatomic reasons. And yeah, this there's a possibility. So, are you familiar with BMI as a parameter? Body mass index. The body mass index is essentially a way to characterize the body composition of an individual. It's, as said, it's the weight in kilograms divided by the height in meters squared. You generally consider everything below 18.5 kilograms per square meter in individuals older than 16 years as malnourished. Everything greater than 18.5 up to 20 as lower normal, 20 to 25 normal, 25 to 30 mildly overweight, 30 to 35 obese, greater than 35 morbidly obese. That's the classification of the WHO. And you find some very interesting extremes in the spectrum. So it's very interesting. And you will see the enhanced data. Keep the parameter in mind for the enhanced data, because body mass index has a number of really, really interesting associations, ranging from blood pressures, and you've seen the mass, the exemplary finding project of Josh. Needed the BMI analysis. It's a very fascinating parameter. It's not very accurate, understood, but it's fascinating because it's kind of a Pullman's measure of body composition. This is what you have at your disposition, right? It's considerably easy to measure the height, and it's considerably easy to measure the weight. And you gain actually a couple of interesting insights, and you get a lot of interesting associations with real life data. That's very interesting. But you will see, you will have to enhance even more data. Please also scout through whatever parameter you will find on the CDC website. They are really interesting parameters. Okay, what else do we have to do? I think this is pretty much over. No? So then we need 2 more histograms, but I trust you can do those now alone. We did it for men and women. That's also easier, right? Histogram, box plot. All right. Any questions? Was everything clear? It was a lot, right? Was it easy to follow? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Go through it once again.
Yes. In case any questions, I think the most important aspects at this point in time, what is really important for you to get comfortable with is to just type stuff in and just write it. Just give it a spin. Just have a look at data, inspect data, run a couple of plots, do some descriptive statistics, just get comfortable with it. Get comfortable with addressing some certain cells within variables. Try to play around and define different variables. Define, let's say, you just for testing purposes, let's say you take, I don't know, cell 2, 3, and 4 from variable 5, 6, 7, and just see what that means. Just see how you can get to a means end and how you can define what you may want to define. And then you will, I guess at one point you will get comfortable with it to the extent that you are comfortable with it and you're ready to do analysis, for example. Any questions from those at home? Aria, you there?
I think last week was a little bit more intuitive.
What is more intuitive?
Last week's material was a little bit more intuitive, but this wasn't too bad.
Okay, good. I'm happy to hear that. Happy to hear that. So yeah, so then let me know. Like I'm gonna stick around until 7. If you have any more questions, if not, I think we can conclude for today. So we went through the practice lab. Good luck with finalizing the practice lab. It's really just these bullet points to be answered. And then just submit it by next week, Wednesday. Actually, gotta change to the. Deadline is changed. So next week, Wednesday.
So we have to submit a PDF of plots or.
Preferably a PDF, yes. If you embed it in a Word document, that's fine.
Okay. Take a screenshot of it.
Yes. Just copy paste the output. So really run the code. I want to see that you have run the code. So I want to see that you walked through each line item and that you have actually run the code and it worked and just copy that in the Word document. Yeah, preferably is actually a text output file. But just try a wider way. You're gonna find it. It's like I don't want to torture you with too much PDFs, but yeah, preferably it would be all in a PDF in a way. But like just find your own way. It's gonna be fun. Just that I clearly see that you did run the code.
So have to check the previous assignments.
I did not have time yet, unfortunately. Are there specific questions?
I just want to check like the assignments which I sent that credit went run through.
Yeah. Okay, I can have a look at it, or if you want, we can always look at it now together if you want. Yeah, it doesn't matter. I'll have a look at it. I'll try to get to it later today. Not today, but just. All right, sounds good. Well, then, thanks for your attention and good luck with the practice that. Let me know if any questions.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Recording.